So there are 5 to 6 types of factoring out there, and we're going to be looking at the different kinds of factoring as we go through our lessons. Today I'm going to show you a second type. Um, the first type, what came from our first lesson, is called factoring at a greatest common factor. That's when you look at all your terms. Here I got 4 terms, so I look at all 4 and ask, do they all have a common factor? What do you think? On number 1, do you guys see a common factor? You could see it with like 3 of them, but anybody see it with all 4? No, other than 1. So we say these are all relatively prime towards each other. There really is no factor in that sense. But this still can be factored. We need some more tools in how to factor this. And so if that first type of factoring doesn't work, what you do is you split it up in half into groups. So I have 4 terms, so I'm going to split it in half, 2 and 2. And then ask the same question with the first group of 2. Do they have a common factor? Yes. What is it? 2m squared. And so then let's factor just the first 2. So if I divide each of those by 2m squared, what would be left? m plus 4. Good. And then we do it with the second half. Now, this plus sign that's in between those 2 groups, we're going to have to keep. And then the second half, what can we factor out? 9. And if we divide each of those by 9, what's left? m plus 4. So this is not factored. You need to realize that factored's in the form like a times b. And so if you can have a parenthesis times parenthesis, that would be factored. We don't have that here. This is not factored, but we've changed the way it looks, hoping that now we can factor something out of everything. So we went from 4 terms down to 2 terms. And if you look at those 2 terms, do you see a common factor now? They both have the m plus 4. And this is why I gave you number 18 and 19 on your homework to start to look for these kinds of factors. And so yeah, they both have the m plus 4. And so we're going to factor that m plus 4 out. And so I'm going to divide each of these by the m plus 4, which gets rid of the m plus 4. And what would be left? 2m squared plus 9. And now that's factored form. That is parentheses times another set of parentheses. Okay. What's the opposite of factoring? What's the opposite operation of factoring? Multiplication. Okay. And so whenever you're doing a factoring problem, and they're going to get more complex, some of them you're going to feel like, I think I did that right, but I'm not sure. And so it's going to be important eventually to know how to check your work. And so we're going to start that process. And to check, you do the opposite. You multiply. So we're going to check this. So we take my answer, m plus 4 times 2m squared plus 9. I'm going to multiply that out and see if I end up with the original problem. If I do, then I know I did my problem right. If I don't, then I know there's an error somewhere. Maybe it's an error in my checking, or maybe it's an error in my factoring. And plus, this gives us a little more practice with multiplying, which we need. So we're going to distribute, because on Friday I talked about a new way to multiply. And so we're going to distribute that m plus 4 to 2m squared. And we're going to distribute to the plus 9. And at first it's a little hard to see where things are going, so I'm going to highlight where pieces are. I'll distribute that m plus 4 to both the 2m squared and to the 9. Then I'm going to distribute one more time, see what I end up with. And I end up with 2m to the third plus 8m squared plus 9m plus 36. And I compare that with where I started, and they match. So that gives me the confidence that my factoring was correct. I know I did everything right. And I can go to the next problem. Okay. So on your homework, you'll see just on this part, I think it's number 5 to 10, you'll have a box for doing the work and a box for checking, and I want you to do it on 5 to 10. On the other ones on the homework, you don't have to check. Where I specified to check, I do want you to do that. And on these, we're going to practice that some more. So I know you saw it once on number 1. Just want you to give you a 30-second head start on number 2, just to start to think, what would you do first, second? I'm not going to give you enough time to finish, but just get started number 2. So on number 2, don't forget what we did on Friday. If you look at all four terms, do they have a common factor other than 1? Or are they relatively prime? They're relatively prime, right? We can't factor them with the greatest common factor, no, other than 1. So then we try this new kind of factoring. We call it factoring by grouping. So we got 4 terms, so we split it into 2 and 2. The first 2 terms, we could factor what out? 3x squared, and what's left? 2x plus 3. Because you divide 6x cubed by 3x squared and get 2x, and 9x squared divided by 3x squared gives you the 3. Then you look at the second half, the second group. What can you factor out of that second group? Nothing. And so what do? Well, we still want to write the 2x plus 3. I'm still going to put a parenthesis here. Do we see a common factor? So we still have 2 terms we created right here and here. They both have a 2x plus 3, right? And so I'm going to factor out that 2x plus 3. And what's left? 3x squared. And so some people mess up here because there's no number in front of the parenthesis. And so they say, well, there's only a 3x squared, and then they just put parenthesis on there and stop. You'd be wrong. There's 2 pieces, so you should have 2 pieces here. And where do the pieces come from? Well, you divide this term by 2x plus 3, which goes away, and I get 3x squared. Divide the second one by 2x plus 3, and you get 1. So if it helps you, you could put the 1 up here already so you see it to remind you, hey, I got to put that 1 there. Okay? So now it's factored. So let's check. So write your answer, 2x plus 3, 3x squared plus 1, and distribute. So the 2x plus 3 gets distributed to the 3x squared plus 1. And then we distribute one more time. And we get 6x to the third plus 9x squared plus 2x plus 3, which matches what we started with. And so again, it gives you the confidence that our factoring was correct. Now I'm going to give you time to finish number 3, okay? I want you to do number 3. I want you to factor it, and I want you to check the answer. I'm going to give you a lot more time on this one, and I'm going to come around and check what you guys are doing. So on number 3, you have 4 terms. When you have 4 terms, that's when you think maybe do factoring by grouping, but you always check. The first thing is if I could pull out a greatest common factor from those 4 terms. In this case, is there a number that divides all 4 of those? Or a term that divides all 4 of those? So factoring by grouping, we're going to take a look at the first two, 64d to the third and negative 40d squared. What can I divide them both by? 8. And how many d's? 2 d's, d squared, right? And so I'm going to divide each of those by 8 and d squared, and I end up with 8, because 64 divided by 8 is 8. And d to the third divided by d squared is just 1d, right? Minus 5. Now, I didn't tell you this, I want you to try it on your own, but if ever, when you start on the second group, if that second group starts with a negative, you're going to have to factor out a negative number or negative something, okay? So we're going to have to do that. Otherwise, if you don't, you won't be able to progress through this, okay? So I want to factor out a negative, and looks like 3 goes into both 24 and 15. And I'm left with, now careful, if you factor out a negative, you need to divide both of these by negatives, which switches your signs. So you end up with a positive 8d and a negative 5, which is exactly what we want, because when we do this factoring by grouping, we need a common factor. We're creating a common factor for those two terms. So if we look at these two terms, we see that they both have an 8d minus 5. And if I divide out that blue part that I highlighted, I'm left with the 8d squared minus 3. And now it's in factored form. There's no minus sign in between these parentheses. It's a product. It's like an A times a B. Okay, make sure you check this. I'm expecting that you guys are doing everything I'm doing here. So we're taking the 8d minus 5 and distributing it to the 8d squared minus 3. And then continue to distribute, and we get 64 d to the third minus 40d squared minus 24d plus 15, which is what we started with. Again, if you're able to do that, you're doing things right. You have one last one like this, number 4, but leave a little room. I want you to try it again, but leave a little room at the bottom, because I'm going to add in one more problem that's not like this, and I'll show you right now. So if you finish number 4 and you want to try it, you can. Again, I'm going to give you some more time. Try number 4. a favorite mistake I saw. Okay, because I want to point it out because it's something that people tend to do, and I want you to correct that if that's something you're doing. So here, this is not a mistake. We look at these and notice we can factor out an x to the 4th, divide both by x to the 4th and get 3x squared, plus 5. Look at the second half. It's got a minus sign, so I'm pulling out a minus. And then besides that, I can't really pull anything out, so I'm just going to pull out a 1. And I change the signs because I'm dividing by a negative, so I get positive 3x squared plus 5. So there's no mistake yet. The mistake that I'm noticing, as more than one of you, is on this next move here. So we notice that they both have a 3x squared plus 5. And so 3x squared plus 5 is put here. And then when we divide out the 3x plus 5, we get x to the 4th minus 1. And then you leave it like that. The thing that's wrong with this is it's saying, well, what's being multiplied with the x to the 4th minus 1? Only the 5. So I don't want that. I want to multiply everything here with the x to the 4th minus 1. So please make sure you have parentheses around this piece here. Otherwise, it will be marked wrong. So you want to get in that habit. When we check this, I'm going to do it pretty quickly. Distribute. Distribute again. And that should be a negative, not a plus. And it matches what we had there. So I did it right. I'm going to keep it. Okay. So this last one, I want to show you number 5 really quickly. It's what we were doing before. If I want to solve, I need to make sure it's equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 7x from both sides here because it has to be equal to 0 when we're solving. And we get 2x squared minus 4x equals 0 because I want to use that zero product property. Now I need a times b. Just like last night's homework or the weekend homework, you factor. I could factor a 2x out of these two terms, and I'm left with an x minus 2. And now I have the a times b format is equal to 0. So I could use my zero product property, set each piece equal to 0, and solve. And I get my 2 answers. All right, guys, I'll see you tomorrow.